Imagine for a moment that the entire world is one, not divided into the 6 continents you learned about, not the coastlines and mountain ranges and river systems you might picture on a globe, but one single, vast, continuous landmass, a supercontinent stretching from the cold latitudes near the poles all the way down through the warm equatorial belt and back up again. A land so enormous that rain falling on its interior would evaporate before it could reach the center. Geologists call it Pangaea. From the Greek, all the earth. It is surrounded on all sides by a single global ocean, Panthalassa, all the sea, enormous and ancient and stretching without interruption around the curvature of the planet. The sky above Pangaea is not the sky you know. The atmosphere holds far more carbon dioxide than it does today. The air is warm and thick, and the clouds that build over the coasts carry vast amounts of moisture before they break in the seasonal monsoon rains. There are no ice caps, no frozen poles. The world, from top to bottom, is warmer than anything alive today would recognize. And across the red and brown deserts, the rocky river valleys, the shallow seas beginning to form at the continent's edges, life has taken root. Life here as always. We are entering the Triassic period, 252 million years ago, and we are arriving at a moment of rebuilding after a catastrophe so vast that its name is still spoken with something like awe. The Great Dying. Before the Triassic, there was another world entirely, the Permian, full of its own creatures, its own forests, its own long-established ecosystems. And then, approximately 252 million years ago, something broke. A series of enormous volcanic eruptions on the eastern side of Pangaea, what is now Siberia, poured carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere in quantities that may have continued for hundreds of thousands of years. Temperatures spiked. The oceans acidified. Oxygen levels in the deep water dropped, and the living world, which had been building and diversifying for hundreds of millions of years, very nearly came to an end. Nearly 96% of all marine species vanished. More than 2/3 of all life on land. The coral reefs, those complex ancient underwater cities, were gone. The great forests, gone. The seas, which had teemed with life since before the Cambrian, fell nearly silent. It is the closest life has ever come to not continuing, but life does not give up easily. Life, it turns out, never gives up at all. In the early Triassic, in the wake of the dying, a small creature stirs in the red-brown wastelands of Pangaea. It is called Lystrosaurus, a stocky, robust, deeply unremarkable animal about the size of a large pig, with a blunt, shovel-shaped face, a pair of small tusks, and a plodding, heavy-footed walk. It is not beautiful. It is not swift. It is not particularly clever. But it is here, when almost nothing else is. And it is a survivor. Lystrosaurus spreads across the face of Pangaea. Fossil bones of this animal have been found on every continent, including Antarctica, which was not yet frozen in those ancient times. It was not that Lystrosaurus was especially well designed. It was simply that it could eat almost anything. The dry, tough, nutrient-poor plants that grew in the recovering landscape. And it could do so efficiently enough to persist. To keep going. To wait for the world to recover around it. There is something almost moving about that. The world has come as close to ending as it ever will. And here is this animal, this ordinary, stubborn, unheroic animal, rooting through the ash-gray soil for something to eat. Moving forward. As you settle deeper into the warmth of the night, the Triassic world continues its slow recovery around us. Ferns push through the cracked earth. Horsetails and club mosses soften the edges of the streams. Cycads, with their thick, pineapple-like trunks and feathery crowns of leaves, begin to establish themselves in the lowlands. Where there are plants, there are insects. The insects survived the Great Dying better than most. Small, adaptable, capable of eating almost anything. Beetles and dragonflies and the early ancestors of many modern groups pick their way through the recovering vegetation or hover above the warm, shallow rivers. And where there are insects, there are the animals that eat them. The archosaurs are rising. Archosaur means ruling lizard, though they are not exactly lizards in the modern sense. They are a broad group of reptiles distinguished by certain features of their skulls and ankles, and in the Triassic they diversify rapidly into an astonishing range of forms. Some are low and heavily armored, like tanks of flesh and bone, moving slowly through the undergrowth. Others are tall and long-legged, bipedal, running on 2 feet with their tails held out behind them for balance. Some take to the water. Among them, in 2 lineages that will eventually diverge and take very different paths, are the ancestors of the crocodile and the ancestor of the dinosaur. The first dinosaurs. They appear in the fossil record approximately 240 to 245 million years ago. Small creatures, most of them, in the early Triassic landscape. Eoraptor is one of the earliest we know well. It is perhaps the size of a large dog, lightly built, running on 2 hind legs, with small forelimbs and hands capable of grasping. Its teeth are a mixture of shapes, some suited to tearing meat, some to processing plant matter, suggesting an opportunistic diet, eating whatever was available. It is not dominant. It is not the apex predator of its time. It picks its way through a landscape where other, larger archosaurs, the pseudosuchians, the crocodile line relatives, are the more formidable animals. For much of the Triassic, it is those armored, crocodile-like creatures that are the more impressive predators. The dinosaurs for now occupy the margins. But margins can be very productive places. When the world changes, as it always does, it is often the animals in the margins who are best placed to fill the new spaces. There is something else happening in the Triassic that we should note quietly before moving on. In the shadow of the archosaurs, in the leaf litter, in the crevices under rocks and fallen logs, a new kind of animal is taking its first tentative steps. The ancestors of the mammals. They descend from a group called the cynodonts, small, warm-blooded relatives of the ancient synapsids that once ruled the Permian world. In the Triassic, these proto-mammals are tiny, mostly mouse-sized or shrew-sized, with fine whiskers that suggest the beginnings of hair, and metabolisms that keep their bodies warm even when the air around them is cool. They are almost certainly nocturnal, most active at night when the large cold-blooded archosaurs are sluggish. Their brains, relative to their body size, are already somewhat larger and more complex than those of the reptiles around them. Their senses, smell, hearing, touch, are exquisitely developed for life in the dark. They are small. They are hidden. They are, for now, utterly insignificant in the grand drama of the Triassic. But they are also patient, and patience, in the long run, is one of the most powerful forces in evolution. 201 million years ago, the Triassic ends as it began, in catastrophe. The rift that has been slowly tearing Pangaea apart triggers massive volcanic activity along what is now the Central Atlantic. Lava pours out across enormous areas. The atmosphere fills again with volcanic gases. Another wave of extinction sweeps through the living world. The large pseudosuchians, those crocodile-line archosaurs that had been the dominant predators for much of the Triassic, are gone. The big amphibians that had lurked in the rivers, gone. The phytosaurs, the etosaurs, the rauisuchids, gone. And the dinosaurs once again survive. They survive because they are adaptable, because they have been living on the margins, eating a variety of foods, tolerating a range of conditions. because whatever traits they carry have, by a combination of chance and circumstance, left them better placed than their competitors to make it through. When the dust settles and the world begins once more to recover, the dinosaurs emerge into a landscape that is almost entirely their own. The Jurassic period has begun. If the Triassic was a world of recovery and experiment, the Jurassic is a world of abundance. Pangaea is now splitting in earnest. The northern landmass, Laurasia, is separating from the southern, Gondwana. Between them, a new sea is spreading, shallow and warm, creating thousands of miles of new coastline. The climate, freed from the extreme continental conditions of the old supercontinent, becomes more humid and more varied. Rain reaches farther inland. Temperatures, while still warm, are slightly more moderate, and in the new moisture, in the richer soils, in the expanding forests of conifers and ginkgos and ferns and cycads, the plants explode. And where the plants explode, the animals that eat them have room to grow. Let that image settle for a moment, a world of endless forest. Warm and wet and deeply, primally green. No flowering plants yet, those are still tens of millions of years away. But a green so varied and so dense that it seems almost electric. The great cycads with their crown of leaves, the towering conifers, straight as masts. The ginkgos, whose fan-shaped leaves are so unchanged today that you can find them growing in parks and botanical gardens and city streets. Living fossils, carrying forward a design that was already ancient in the Jurassic. And moving through this world, feeding on it, shaping it. The sauropods. The sauropods are the answer to a question the plant world posed. If there is this much food, growing this high, how large can an animal become? The answer, it turns out, is very large indeed. Diplodocus is perhaps the most familiar of the Jurassic sauropods. A long, low animal, with a neck that stretches forward like a living crane, and a tail that extends even further behind, thin and tapering. The whole animal perhaps 26 meters from tip to tip. It walks on 4 pillar-like legs, and when it moves, the ground remembers it. Its neck, held roughly horizontal, sweeps wide arcs through the low vegetation, stripping ferns and low shrubs with its simple, peg-like teeth. It does not chew. It swallows leaves whole, relying on a complex digestive system, perhaps with fermentation chambers, perhaps with swallowed gastroliths, smooth stones to help grind the plant matter, to extract the nutrition from the vast quantities of plant material it consumes each day. Brachiosaurus is different in character. Taller, more upright, its front legs longer than its rear ones so that its neck rises steeply, like a giraffe's, to browse among the high branches of the conifer canopy. It would have reached food sources completely inaccessible to anything else. A living forklift of extraordinary elegance. These animals lived in groups probably, moved across the landscape in herds, their footfalls leaving depressions in the soft floodplain soils that we can still find today, fossilized, 150 million years later. A trackway of sauropod footprints pressed into the mud of an ancient Jurassic riverbank. Imagine standing at the edge of that ancient forest, watching them pass. The deep, rhythmic thud of their footsteps. The sound of vegetation being stripped. A low rumble, perhaps, infrasound too deep for human ears, that passes through the chest like a feeling rather than a sound. You are very small beside them, and they barely notice you at all. Breathe slowly, feel the warmth. The night is deep and still. We are drifting, you and I, through the long green corridors of the Jurassic, and there is nothing urgent here, nothing demanding, nothing but the slow passage of ancient time around us. The sauropods are the megaherbivores of this world, but they are not alone in it. The stegosaurs, Stegosaurus and its relatives, are the second great group of Jurassic herbivores. They are lower, broader animals, with a distinctive double row of large bony plates running along the spine from the neck to the tail, and a cluster of sharp spikes at the tail tip. The plates have long fascinated scientists. Were they for defense? The arrangement seems awkward for that purpose. Were they for thermoregulation, catching sunlight to warm the blood, or catching the wind to cool it? Were they for display, signals of health and species identity? Perhaps some combination of all of these. Stegosaurus had a brain famously small even by dinosaur standards, roughly the size of a walnut. But small brains are not in themselves a measure of an animal's success. Stegosaurus thrived for millions of years. In evolutionary terms, that is as successful as a creature can be. The theropods, the bipedal, mostly carnivorous dinosaurs, are also here. Allosaurus is the apex predator of the Jurassic landscape, a large, powerful animal running on two muscular legs with a massive head full of serrated teeth. It is not the relentless lone hunter of popular imagination. Like many large predators, it may have been an opportunist, targeting the young, the old, the sick, the already dead, feeding on what the world offered rather than pursuing what the world withheld. And above, always above, in the Jurassic world, the pterosaurs. They have been here since the late Triassic, the pterosaurs, but in the Jurassic they diversify and spread across every sky. They fly on wings of skin, stretched between an enormously elongated fourth finger and the body. Not the feathered, boned wings of birds which have not yet appeared, but something uniquely their own. Skin and hollow bones and muscles finely tuned for the thermals rising off the warm Jurassic landscape. Some are small, sparrow-sized, darting through the forest margins to catch insects. Others are already growing large, Rhamphorhynchus with its long tail and fish-catching jaws gliding over the coastal shallows. They are not birds. They are something older and in many ways stranger. A flying vertebrate evolved completely independently, following a path that birds will later parallel but never exactly duplicate. And then, in the late Jurassic, something appears that changes everything again. In the limestone deposits of what is now Bavaria, Germany, laid down in a warm, shallow, tropical sea that covered much of Central Europe 150 million years ago, the fossil of a small animal is preserved in extraordinary detail. Its bones are clearly those of a theropod dinosaur: long legs, grasping feet, sharp claws, a long bony tail, but pressed into the stone around it, perfectly preserved. Feathers. Archaeopteryx. The first bird, or rather the first known animal that sits precisely on the boundary between dinosaur and bird, combining features of both so completely that scientists spent decades debating which side of the line it belongs on. The feathers are fully formed, not scales in the process of becoming feathers, but proper, asymmetric flight feathers like those of a modern bird. It almost certainly could fly, or at least glide, but it also had teeth, small and sharp, and clawed fingers on its wings, and a long bony tail, quite unlike the short fused tailbones of living birds. It is a transitional form, a creature caught, frozen in stone, at the exact moment when one thing became another. The birds have begun. In the Jurassic oceans, the world is equally full. The ichthyosaurs, those streamlined, dolphin-shaped marine reptiles that first appeared in the Triassic, have reached their peak diversity and beauty. The largest, Shawnosaurus, grows to lengths of 20 meters, drifting through the open ocean on long migrations to reach feeding grounds rich with fish and squid. The smaller Ichthyosaurus, common in the shallower European seas, hunts in groups, its large eyes, the largest relative to body size of any known vertebrate, gathering light in the dim underwater world. The plesiosaurs develop into two great forms, The long-necked plesiosaurs with their small heads and long snake-like necks, paddling slowly through the water as they ambush fish and cephalopods from below. And the pliosaurs, with their enormously powerful jaws and shorter, broader necks, built for speed and power rather than patience. The seas between the fragmenting continents teem with ammonites, those beautiful, coiled shell cephalopods that range in size from a thumbnail to a cartwheel, their polished shells spiraling with mathematical precision. They are so common, so widely distributed, and so rapidly evolving that their fossils are used today to date rock layers across the world. Where you find a particular ammonite species, you know within a few million years exactly when those rocks were formed. And in the floor of the Jurassic forest, in the root systems of the great cycads, in the decaying logs and the deep leaf litter, the early mammals continue their quiet lives. More diverse now than in the Triassic. More varied in their ways of living. Some have become specialists, insectivores, seed eaters, even one or two experimenting with a semi-aquatic lifestyle, paddling through the slow forest streams to catch fish. Their teeth are becoming more complex, molars with multiple cusps for processing a wider range of foods. Their inner ears, the tiny bones that will eventually give mammals their extraordinary hearing, are continuing their slow transformation from jawbones into something entirely new. Their brains are growing, not quickly, not dramatically. Just a fraction of a percent larger with each passing generation across millions of generations. But the direction is set. You are drifting deeper into the night now. The Jurassic world is falling away behind us, green and enormous and ancient, and we are moving forward into the Cretaceous, into the final, richest chapter of the age of dinosaurs. 145 million years ago. The Cretaceous is the longest period of the Mesozoic. 80 million years of slow, ongoing change. The continents continue their drift, South America and Africa finally separating, the South Atlantic spreading wider each million years. The shallow seas that covered the interiors of the continents reached their greatest extent. In North America, a shallow, warm sea called the Western Interior Seaway divides the continent down the middle, from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, creating two island continents where before there was one. These separations matter deeply to the animals that live on them. Cut off from one another by sea, isolated on their own island landmasses, populations diverge. New species arise. The same basic dinosaurian body plan gives rise to an astonishing variety of forms, shaped by the different climates, different plants, different pressures of each separated world. In the northern half of what will become North America, the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, are the dominant herbivores. They are herd animals, probably, moving in large groups across the floodplains and forests of the Cretaceous. Their most striking feature is the variety of their crests, hollow, bony structures on the tops of their heads that range from simple bumps to elaborate curved tubes and plates. Parasaurolophus carries a long, curved crest that extends backwards from its head like a backward sweeping horn. This crest is hollow, connected to the nasal passages, and it almost certainly functioned as a resonating chamber, an instrument. The animal would have pushed air through it, and the shape of the crest would have given its call a specific, distinctive quality. A low, haunting sound, perhaps, carrying through the Cretaceous forest like a foghorn through fog. Edmontosaurus, by contrast, lacks a bony crest, but may have had a fleshy comb, like a rooster's, a soft tissue display structure that would not fossilize, but whose traces remain in the exceptional mummies sometimes found with skin impressions preserved. These animals moved in herds of perhaps hundreds or thousands. Their feet wore paths through the undergrowth. Their grazing shaped the plant communities around them. They were, in the ecological sense of the word, engineers of their landscape. The ceratopsids, the horned dinosaurs, are another great Cretaceous success story. Triceratops is the most familiar, a massive three-horned animal with an enormous bony frill extending from the back of its skull, built like a living tank and about as difficult to bring down. But Triceratops is only one member of a diverse and beautiful family. Styracosaurus has a single, large nasal horn and a frill edged with long, dramatic spikes. Protoceratops is small and frilled, but hornless. Psittacosaurus has a parrot-like beak and primitive fringe of quill-like structures. Each species carries its frill and horns in a different configuration, and the variety suggests that these structures were primarily for recognition and display, for distinguishing one species from another, for signaling health and dominance within the herd. In the forests of the late Cretaceous, a creature that could read the shape of a frill or the curve of a horn was a creature that could find its own kind in a world full of similar animals. The elaborate beauty of the ceratopsian frill was, in some deep sense, a form of language. Breathe slowly. Let the images come and go as they will. You don't have to hold on to any of them. The ceratopsians, the hadrosaurs, the ancient forests, they are just passing by, unhurried, as we drift through deep time together. In South America, isolated on its own Gondwanan fragment, the sauropods reach their final and most extraordinary expression. The titanosaurs are the last and largest of the sauropod lineage, and in the Cretaceous of Patagonia, they achieve sizes that are almost beyond biological comprehension. Patagoteton majorum, named in part for the region where it was found, in part for the titan it resembled, may have weighed as much as 70 tons, 37 meters from nose to tail, the largest land animal that has ever existed, by any measure we can apply. Imagine the logistics of being that large. Your heart, the size of a car engine, beats perhaps 6 times a minute, pumping blood through vessels the width of a man's arm. Your lungs, when they expand, displace hundreds of liters of air. Every step you take transfers the weight of dozens of cars through your legs and feet to the ground. You eat continuously, stripping branches as you walk, your digestive system running at full capacity at all times just to maintain what you have. You don't really rest. You stand, and you feed, and you move, slowly, unstoppably, like a weather pattern given flesh and bone. You have no fear. At your size, there is almost nothing in the world that could threaten you. You have no hurry either. Time moves differently when you are 70 tons. The world arranges itself around you rather than the other way around. And then, in the early Cretaceous, something appears that will, over the following millions of years, quietly transform every ecosystem on Earth. A flower. The first angiosperms, flowering plants, appear in the fossil record approximately 130 million years ago. They are not at first impressive. Small, weedy, generalized things, growing in disturbed habitats and along riverbanks, adapted to colonizing bare ground quickly. But they carry an innovation of almost incalculable importance: the enclosed seed. In older plants, conifers, cycads, ferns, the seeds or spores are exposed to the air, fertilized directly by wind. In the angiosperms, the seed is enclosed within a protective layer of tissue, a fruit which offers both protection and, eventually, a means of animal dispersal. Eat the fruit, carry the seed, deposit it, wrapped in a little fertilizer, somewhere new. And the flowers themselves, structures evolve to attract the animals that will carry pollen from one plant to another, open an entirely new relationship between the plant world and the animal world. A relationship of color and scent and sweetness. The insects respond first. Bees evolve from predatory wasps around 100 million years ago, reshaping their bodies and behaviors around the collection of nectar and pollen. Butterflies and moths, beetles, flies, hundreds of insect groups radiate alongside the flowering plants, each adapting to particular flowers, particular scents, particular times of bloom, and the plants, in turn, adapt to their pollinators, deepening their petals, intensifying their colors, producing more nectar, blooming earlier or later to catch the insects that are there. It is a co-evolution of extraordinary beauty and complexity. A duet played out over millions of years, neither partner leading, both shaping the other. By the end of the Cretaceous, angiosperms dominate most of the world's vegetation. The cycads and conifers are still here, still important, but increasingly outnumbered by the flowering trees. The grass is beginning to appear, the fruit-bearing plants that will eventually become orchard trees, and vegetable crops and wildflowers in every color. A world becoming, in some slow way, more like the world you know. 68 million years ago, the very end of the Cretaceous. The ecosystems of this time are, in many ways, the most complex and fully realized of the entire Mesozoic. Tyrannosaurus rex stalks the Hell Creek Formation of what will become Montana, its binocular vision tracking the movements of Triceratops across the wide, flat floodplain. Ankylosaurus moves through the undergrowth, its body armored in thick bone from neck to tail, the massive club at the end of its tail capable of shattering the ankle of any predator foolish enough to attack from behind. In the trees and in the shrubs, the first modern groups of birds are appearing, recognizable ancestors of ducks and shorebirds, their toothed beaks giving way, species by species, to the lighter, keratin beaks of the birds we know today. The mammals, still small, have diversified quietly into dozens of ecological roles. Multituberculates, rodent-like creatures with broad, complex molars for grinding hard seeds, are among the most successful. Early marsupials and early placentals have appeared, each carrying their young in different ways. The world is full, intricate, layered, as complex as it has ever been in all the hundreds of millions of years before. And then, 66 million years ago, an object 10 to 15 kilometers wide enters the atmosphere over the Caribbean at a shallow angle, moving faster than a bullet, generating a shock wave that compresses the air ahead of it to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. It strikes the shallow sea of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The energy released in that single moment is equivalent to approximately 100 million megatons of TNT. A crater 180 kilometers wide is blasted into the earth. Billions of tons of rock and vaporized seawater and pulverized limestone are hurled into the upper atmosphere. Tsunamis radiate outward across the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. And then, in the following hours, the debris rains back down across the entire planet, and where it lands, it ignites. The fires burn. We move through this moment gently. There is no need to linger here. The catastrophe is real and vast, and it changes everything. But the story continues. The sky darkens. Months pass, then years, with the sun reduced to a gray smear through the dust and sulfate aerosols that fill the upper atmosphere. Photosynthesis slows, then nearly stops. The food chains built on plants collapse. The large herbivores, dependent on vast quantities of living vegetation, starve. The large predators, dependent on the large herbivores, follow. The non-avian dinosaurs, every species, every lineage, every form, from the massive titanosaurs to the small, agile dromaeosaurs, are gone. After 165 million years of dominance, the dinosaurs, as we usually mean the word, simply cease. The pterosaurs cease. The great marine reptiles, the mosasaurs, the plesiosaurs, cease. The ammonites, those beautiful coiled shell inhabitants of every Mesozoic sea, after surviving every previous extinction event for hundreds of millions of years, are gone. But in the rivers and burrows and the cold mud of the pond bottoms, things survive. Birds, the feathered flying dinosaurs, the lineage that includes Archaeopteryx and its descendants, make it through. small enough to survive on seeds that persist long after the plants that produced them have died. Their metabolisms fast enough to keep warm, their world-spanning flight giving them options that no land-bound animal can access. Crocodilians tucked into the mud of rivers and estuaries slow their metabolisms to almost nothing, living on stored fat and the detritus-based food chains of rivers and lakes that are less immediately dependent on photosynthesis. Turtles, lizards, snakes, small frogs. They wait in the cold and the dark, and they come through. And the mammals. The small, warm, night-eyed mammals that have been waiting, patiently, persistently, generation after generation, in the margins of the dinosaur world for 65 million years. They emerge, blinking, into a world emptied of its rulers. The Paleogene period. 66 million years ago. A new beginning. The ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs are like rooms standing open in a vast house. The mega-herbivore niche. The apex predator niche. The browser of the high canopy. The runner of the open plain. The swimmer of the river. All of them empty, waiting. And the mammals, for the first time in their long history, have space to fill them. Within 10 million years, the diversity of mammals explodes in ways that still astonish scientists. From a handful of small shrew-like survivors, the lineages diverge in every direction. Condylarths, the first hoofed mammals, begin to spread across the recovering forests, filling the herbivore niches. They are not yet horses or elephants or deer. They are, for now, something more generalized, something that is still working out what it will become. But the direction is established. Early primates appear in the canopy. Small, large-eyed, grasping-handed, their brains already somewhat larger than those of comparable animals. They eat fruit and insects, learning the geometry of the forest by leaping and climbing, developing the hand-eye coordination and social intelligence that will, tens of millions of years later, transform into something entirely new. Early bats appear, the first mammals to achieve powered flight, their forelimbs transformed into wings in a process that still holds surprises for scientists. Early whales are still walking on land, wading into the shallows of the ancient Tethys Sea to fish, beginning the long transformation that will eventually take them fully into the ocean. The world is being reinvented, organism by organism, in the warm chaos of the early Cenozoic. 56 million years ago, the Earth briefly spikes in temperature, a geological event called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, when some pulse of greenhouse gas warms the global climate by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius over just a few thousand years. It is, on the timescale of geology, an almost instantaneous shift. And in this sudden warmth, the mammals diversify further and faster still. The warm window allows species to spread across latitudes that were previously too cool. The even-toed ungulates, the ancestors of deer, pigs, cattle, camels, hippos, and whales, appear. The odd-toed ungulates, the ancestors of horses and rhinoceroses, spread. The true primates, euprimates, with their fully forward-facing eyes and grasping hands and social complexity, diversify and disperse. A strange footnote to this warming event. Many mammals of the time became smaller. A species of early horse called Sipher-hippus decreased in body size by 30% during the thermal maximum, then grew larger again as the world cooled. Smaller bodies lose heat less efficiently, which is advantageous in the cold. In the heat, smaller bodies may be a way of reducing food requirements. Body size, it turns out, is not fixed. It is a response to the world. Following the warmth of the early Eocene, the world cools, slowly, across millions of years, but unmistakably. The mechanism for this cooling is one of the most poetic in all of Earth's history. 49 million years ago, the Arctic Ocean, landlocked at the time, surrounded by continents, connected to the global ocean only by narrow channels, becomes covered in great mats of a tiny floating fern called azolla. Azolla grows rapidly on fresh water and in the landlocked Arctic Ocean, where river water diluted the surface salinity, it blooms extravagantly. As the fern blooms and dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, it carries carbon dioxide with it. Carbon that had been in the atmosphere is now locked in the sediment at the bottom of the sea. Over 800,000 years, this process, repeated season after season, generation after generation of tiny ferns, pulls atmospheric carbon dioxide from approximately 3,500 parts per million down to approximately 650. The greenhouse is being gently, inexorably dismantled. The world cools. The poles begin to freeze. The ice sheets build on Antarctica, 40 million years before anyone or anything is there to see them. Let the image of that rest with you for a moment. Tiny ferns, floating on an Arctic sea, in a world before humans, before whales, before recognizable birds, simply growing and dying and sinking, and changing everything. 34 million years ago, at the transition between the Eocene and the Oligocene epochs, global temperatures drop significantly. The first permanent ice sheets appear on Antarctica. Sea levels fall as water is locked into ice. The warm, humid forests that had covered much of the planet contract toward the equator. And in their place, in the cooler, drier zones, new habitats expand. Open woodlands, scrublands, and, beginning to appear in the geological record for the first time in significant quantities, grasses. Grass is a revolutionary plant. It grows from the base, not the tip, which means it can be grazed, burned, or trampled, and will simply grow back from the root. It is tough, fibrous, low in nutrition by leaf, but compensated by sheer abundance. And it can cover ground that forests cannot, drier, colder, more exposed. As the grass spreads, it creates a new world. 23 million years ago. The Miocene epoch. The grasslands and savannas are now establishing themselves across the interiors of the continents, and the mammals that graze them are transforming to meet the challenge. Early horses had 3 toes, broad feet, forest-dwelling habits. By the Miocene, the horse lineage is experimenting with reduction of the side toes, with longer legs, with teeth that grow higher above the gum line to compensate for the silica in grass, which wears teeth down far more quickly than soft forest browse. 1 toe remains. The modern horse is taking shape. Not yet. There are many more millions of years and many more species to come. But the direction is clear. Open ground, speed. Endurance, a single perfectly engineered hoof that distributes impact and provides traction on the flat, hard ground of the plain. Similar transformations are happening elsewhere. Antelopes and deer developing longer legs and faster reflexes. Rhinoceroses, once forest browsers, shifting to grazing. Elephants, the descendants of small tapir-like animals, growing larger, developing the trunk, evolving the high-crowned grinding teeth that let them process the tough, abrasive vegetation of the savanna. In the cooling, drying world of the late Miocene, in the forests and forest margins of East Africa, the primates are under a particular kind of pressure. The forest is shrinking. The forest patches are becoming separated by stretches of open grassland. An ape that lives in the forest must now, if it wants to move between patches of trees, cross the open ground. And crossing the open ground changes what it means to survive. You are very comfortable now, I think. You are drifting. The story continues around you like a very slow current, carrying you forward without effort. 3 million years ago, the formation of the Isthmus of Panama. For tens of millions of years, North and South America had been separated by an open sea, the Central American Seaway, through which tropical ocean currents flowed freely between the Atlantic and the Pacific. South America, in isolation, had developed its own extraordinary fauna. Giant ground sloths the size of elephants, glyptodonts like armored tortoises the size of cars, the terrifying flightless forest racids or terror birds, and a diverse array of marsupials. When the land bridge finally forms, the result of tectonic uplift and volcanic activity along the margin of the Caribbean plate, it closes the seaway. The ocean currents change, the climate of the northern Atlantic shifts, and across the new land bridge, the fauna of two continents separated for tens of millions of years begins to mix. It is called the Great American Biotic Interchange, and it is one of the most dramatic events in the ecological history of the planet. Horses, camels, and tapirs move south from North America. Llamas and guanacos eventually establish themselves all the way to the tip of Patagonia. Saber-toothed cats follow, hunting the new prey. Ground sloths and glyptodonts move north, into North America, eventually spreading as far as Canada. Two worlds meeting, interpenetrating, reshaping one another, 2.5 million years ago. The Quaternary Period. The Ice Ages begin in earnest. The Pleistocene, the geological epoch we are now entering, is defined by a cycle of glaciations. Roughly every 100,000 years, the Earth's orbit shifts very slightly. The tilt of the axis, the shape of the ellipse, the wobble of the poles, and these small, regular changes in the amount of sunlight reaching high latitudes are enough to tip the climate back and forth between ice ages and warmer interglacial periods. The ice sheets grow and advance, covering Canada and Scandinavia and much of northern Eurasia under kilometers of ice. Sea levels fall by 100 meters or more as vast quantities of water are locked away. Coastlines appear that are normally submerged. Land bridges emerge between continents. Then the orbital cycle tips the other way. The ice retreats, the sea rises, the bridges disappear beneath the water, and then again, and again. Dozens of times, over the course of the Pleistocene, the world breathes in and out, cold and warm, and the animals on its surface must adapt, or migrate, or perish with each change. In Africa, during this time of instability and change, something extraordinary is happening in the savanna and the woodland edge. The hominins. 7 million years ago, the lineage that will lead to us diverged from the lineage that will lead to the chimpanzees. The evidence for this comes partly from fossils and partly from genetics. By comparing the DNA of living humans and chimpanzees, biologists can estimate when the ancestral population split, and the answer is somewhere between 6 and 8 million years ago, in Africa. The earliest members of our family, Sahelanthropus chadensis, found in Chad, Ardipithecus found in Ethiopia, are already walking upright, in some fashion, though they are also clearly comfortable in trees. Their brains are chimpanzee-sized. Their faces are more ape-like than human-like. They are not us. They are not quite anything we have a good word for. They are the beginning of us. 4 million years ago, the Australopithecines flourish across East and South Africa. Australopithecus afarensis, the species to which the famous Lucy belongs, is perhaps the best known. Lucy was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, her fossilized bones scattered across a hillside, and she has told us more about the early stages of human evolution than almost any other single individual. She was small, about 1.5 meters tall, lightly built, with a brain roughly 1/3 the size of ours and a face still strongly projecting, more ape-like than human. But her knee joint, her hip, the angle of her femur, all of it tells the same story. She walked upright, on 2 legs, her hands free. Her world was the East African savanna and the woodland edge, a mosaic of grassland and scattered trees, lake margins, and dry stream beds. She ate what was available, fruit when the trees offered it, roots and tubers dug from the ground, perhaps insects, perhaps the scraps left by larger predators. She lived in a social group, Almost certainly, her relationships complex and persistent in the way that primate relationships always are. She is someone's ancestor. She is across 4 million years of change and transformation, part of the thread that led to you, lying here in the dark, your mind drifting. 2.5 million years ago, the first stone tools appear in the fossil record. Not accidentally shaped rocks, genuinely modified, deliberately struck to create sharp edges for cutting, scraping, processing food. Homo habilis, the earliest member of the genus Homo, is making these tools. Oldowan tools, named for the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania where so many of them were first found. A stone held in one hand. Another stone used as a hammer. A deliberate strike at a precise angle to remove a flake with a sharp edge. It sounds simple. It is, in one sense, very simple. But it requires the ability to hold a mental image, the finished edge, the correct angle, the intended result, and then work backward from that image to the actions needed to achieve it. It requires planning. It requires the representation of a future state that does not yet exist. It is, in its small and ancient way, an act of imagination. 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus, larger, taller, longer-legged, with a brain significantly bigger than any hominin before. Homo erectus develops a more sophisticated tool set, the Acheulean tradition, characterized by the hand axe, a teardrop-shaped stone tool worked on both faces to produce a symmetrical, multi-purpose implement. The hand axe is so enduring, so effective, so deeply embedded in the human story, that it is made and used, in essentially the same form, for over 1 million years. Homo erectus is the first of our lineage to leave Africa. 1.8 million years ago, populations are already in the Republic of Georgia, in what is now the Caucasus. By 1.6 million years ago, they have reached Java in Southeast Asia. By 500,000 years ago, they have reached China. They cross mountains and deserts and rivers. They adapted to tropical forests and cold northern woodlands and open steppe. They discover or inherit the control of fire, the ability to maintain and intentionally use a flame, which gives them warmth, protection from predators, and the ability to cook their food. Cooking, it turns out, is transformative. Cooked food is more digestible, yielding more calories from the same raw material. Cooked food is safer, pathogens are killed, parasites destroyed, and the extra calories go, in time, to the most metabolically expensive organ in the body. The brain. You are very deeply resting now. Your breathing is slow and even, and the images of the ancient world are growing softer, less distinct, blending together at the edges like watercolors left in the rain. Let them. We are nearly at the end of our journey, and the end of our journey is also, in a way, the beginning. 300,000 years ago, in Africa, Homo sapiens appears in the fossil record. Anatomically modern humans. The same body proportions, the same rounded skull, the same reduced brow ridge, the same flat face, the same chin. A feature unique to our species, whose function is still debated. A brain reorganized around language and social cognition, and the kind of flexible, symbolic thinking that allows one thing to stand for another. That allows a mark on a cave wall to mean a horse. That allows a spoken sound to carry the memory of a place seen only by someone now dead. We are storytellers from the beginning. It is perhaps the deepest thing about us. 100,000 years ago, the first modern humans begin to move out of Africa. They follow the coastlines south and east, living on the resources of the shore, shellfish and fish and the seeds of coastal plants. Evidence of this coastal route survives in the genetics of living populations in South and Southeast Asia, whose DNA carries traces of an early expansion that left few other records. 70,000 years ago, a larger wave of dispersal. Modern humans spread across the Middle East, into Central Asia, into Europe. They encounter the Neanderthals, those cold-adapted, heavy-browed, intelligent cousins who have been in Europe for 200,000 years. and they live alongside them, and sometimes with them, and in time they outlast them. The Neanderthals had fire and tools, and ochre for pigment, and burials for their dead. They were people. They had names for one another, very probably. They grieved. There is a Neanderthal burial in what is now Iraq, where the skeleton was found surrounded by flower pollen. Someone laid flowers beside the body of someone they had lost. We carry a small piece of their genome still. A fraction of a percent, mostly inactive but present. A trace of an encounter, a memory written in DNA, carried forward across 40,000 years to this night, to this moment, to the double helix coiled inside the cells of your body. 60,000 years ago, modern humans reach Australia. They cross open ocean to do it, a minimum of 90 kilometers of open water across the Wallace Line, one of the great biogeographic boundaries of the world. They do this in boats, navigating by stars and currents and the behavior of seabirds. It is the first open ocean voyage in the history of life. No other animal had done it intentionally. The descendants of those first Australians have lived on that continent ever since. 60,000 years of continuous cultural tradition, the oldest living cultures on Earth. 60,000 years of knowledge about every plant, every animal, every water source, every season, in one of the most challenging environments in the world. 40,000 years ago, in Europe, the cave paintings begin. At Lascaux, at Chauvet, at Altamira, at hundreds of sites across Europe and Asia, humans begin making images on stone: horses, bison, mammoths, aurochs, deer, rendered with confident, assured lines, with knowledge of animal anatomy and movement that comes from thousands of generations of close observation. They are beautiful. They are astonishing. They are 40,000 years old, and they still catch the breath. Someone painted them by firelight in the deep dark of a cave, with ochre and charcoal and their own hands. Someone made a choice to make something permanent, to put something of themselves into the rock, to be found by someone they could not imagine, in a time they could not conceive. Here I was. Here is what I saw. 30,000 years ago, humans cross into the Americas. They walk across the Beringia land bridge, the wide grassy plain where the Bering Strait now lies, following the great herds of mammoth and bison and horse that graze there. They push south, along the coast or through a corridor between the ice sheets, and within a few thousand years they have reached the far south of South America. The whole world at last is known to someone. Every coast, every mountain range, every river system, every island. Explored, mapped in memory, named in hundreds of languages, and carrying human footprints on every shore. 250 million years of life, distilled into this, into you, from the small, stubborn Lystrosaurus in the red wastelands after the Great Dying, to the first tentative dinosaurs picking their way through the recovering forests of the Triassic, to the giants that shook the ground of the Jurassic, to the feathered hunters and the flowering forests of the Cretaceous, to the small, warm-eyed mammals emerging into the empty Paleogene morning, to the grasslands and the grazing herds of the Miocene, to the upright, fire-carrying, story-telling people who walked out of Africa and found the whole wide world. All of that is in you. All of that is what you are. Your body is the product of an unbroken chain of survival, stretching back to the very beginning of complex life. Every creature in that chain was, in its own time, well suited enough to survive long enough to leave a descendant. And that descendant left a descendant, and that one, another, and eventually, you. Here in the dark, warm and still, breathing slowly. The last link in a chain of 400 million years. The stars outside are the same stars that burned above Pangaea, above the Jurassic forests, where the sauropods moved like slow weather through the ancient green. Above the Cretaceous floodplains, where the hadrosaurs called to each other with their hollow crests. Above the open African savanna where Lucy walked, upright and small, toward a future she could not imagine. The same stars. Still there. Still burning. Slow and cold and impossibly distant, and shining down on you tonight. You have come so far to be here, so very, very far. Across 250 million years, through extinction and renewal, through ice and fire, through the slow drift of continents and the patient work of evolution, through the first stone and the first flame and the first word ever spoken, across all of that. You arrived here, to this night, to this warmth, to this breath. Let yourself rest now. You have earned it. The ancient oceans are still. The great forests are breathing in the dark. The slow continents are moving, as they always have, as they always will. A few centimeters each year, patient and inevitable. The world is very old, and it is still going. And you are part of it. Sleep now. Let the deep time hold you. You are safe. You are here. Rest.